Hey, it's Kay. And this is Skittles, master of all four elements. And these boys right here, well, this is Brian Big Boy Konietzko and Michael Tortellini DiMartino, the creators of Avatar. Following the success of The Last Airbender, Brian and Michael set out to create a more mature follow-up series that would introduce nuanced political themes. The only problem is, Mike and Brian don't understand political ideologies. Book 2 of Korra attempts to explore the distance between the increasingly modern society in which the show is set and the natural world. Korra's uncle, Unalaq, serving as one of the season's antagonists, presents the idea that there is an imbalance, a problem, due to the human realm and the spirit realm being segregated. The spirit realm functioning as a representation of nature itself. The spirits and nature have always been closely intertwined in the Avatar series, and that's further reinforced when Korra's father destroys a sacred forest and angry spirits go on a rampage in retaliation. The message is clear: we are not coexisting peacefully with the natural world. The wedge between humanity and nature is industrialization. Here, in the land of the real, the Industrial Revolution progressively took people off the farms and into the factories, shifting huge populations of people into cities. This change in our methods of production came at the cost of our communities, and the decline of agrarian society drew an increasingly pronounced line between man and nature, as well as fracturing our relationships with each other, where agrarian societies often featured a much more communal way of living with collective harvesting and plenty of time for recreation. The mass migration of people to cities, where the majority of workers were forced into crowded, dirty slums and shifted around at the whims of landlords and factory owners, only served to atomize workers, an effect that has been getting steadily more intense up to the modern day. But this resulted in tons of benefits as well, from advances in medicine to developing rail networks. Average lifespans skyrocketed during the Industrial Revolution despite the drawbacks. But that increased efficiency is reflected in Republic City in a very troubling way. See, people are better at bending now. In The Last Airbender, bending is an ability built largely on a connection to the natural world, and how you fit into it. This is heavily emphasized through the ways Aang and even Zuko must grow and develop as people, to gain understanding of the elements and of bending. The storyline where Zuko learns to abandon his anger and finds that he has to relearn how to firebend by discovering how his new self relates to the elements is a perfect example of this, and one of my favorite parts of the show. Throughout The Last Airbender, we see only 3 people from a ruling family of especially powerful firebenders who presumably had access to the best training in the Fire Nation that can produce lightning from their hands. A technique that is made out to be highly dangerous and incredibly difficult. In Republic City, suddenly damn near everyone can do it. Mako uses it, some mobsters use it, power plant workers use it. In Republic City, where there is a distinct absence of that spiritual connection, a place where nature takes a backseat to the machinations of industry and capital, this rare bending technique is treated like something you could pick up at a trade school. What does this tell us other than the methods of teaching bending in this new world are superior to the old ways? The spiritual is obsolete, and we can prove it by mass-producing skilled laborers who can do things previously reserved only for the Fire Lord and his family. The boys pay lip service to the importance of balance between humanity and the spirits, but the further away humans get from the spirits and nature, the more they seem to achieve. Even a deeply spiritual art like bending, steeped in the cultures of the different nations in this world, is improved across the board by industrialization. This brings us to arguably the real antagonist of this season, Varrick.
If you can't make money during a war, you just flat out cannot make money.
Varric is a capitalist, not an allegorical capitalist like we saw in Book 1. We're talking primo bourgeoisie. Don't worry, the boys will never bring up non-bender oppression again. It's fine. Everything is fine. Varric instigates a coup attempt that leads to a full-blown civil war, all so that he can sell weapons to both sides. Then, back in Republic City, he orchestrates terrorist attacks in order to get the United Republic involved in the war, so he can sell arms to their side as well. When that doesn't work, he enlists the Avatar to use nepotism bending to persuade Zuko's grandson, a military general, to illegally engage the enemy forces behind the government's back. Let me know if this plan sounds familiar.
Well, suppose I were to take the fleet south on some routine training maneuvers, and let's say we were to accidentally run into a hostile northern blockade. We'd have no choice but to defend ourselves, wouldn't we?
Jesus Christ. Varric is a war profiteer and a terrorist, and honestly, he does almost the exact same things Amon did, even staging a terrorist attack at the pro-bending arena, mirroring Amon's attack on the arena in Book 1. The key difference is Amon supposedly did these things for ideology, and Varric, he did them for good old profit. Let's see how the boys treat these two characters who are responsible for very similar crimes by taking a look at how each of them end their respective seasons. Here we have Varric comedically escaping his luxury prison cell on a glider, no real consequences faced for anything he's done. And here we have Oh, right. I think we can learn something about the worldview informing the boys by how they treat characters of different ideological inclinations. Don't worry though, Varric will be back and nobody will be that worried about all the terrorism he did. Through Varric, who is mostly treated as a lovable scamp, even when he literally tries to frame Mako for terrorism, we see how capitalism goes increasingly uncriticized in this series. Even the existence of an underground shantytown full of homeless people is allowed to pass by without a moment of considering how that comes about. Despite the transition to industrial capitalism causing so much turmoil, it is never really identified as the root cause of any of these problems. There's always a focus on bad individuals. But even those individuals, if they're capitalists, get off relatively lightly. Something I think is key to understanding Republic City and the entire United Republic that doesn't get a lot of attention in the show is the fact that it's a colony. In fact, it is a dangerously idealized colony. The Fire Nation brutally invades and occupies the Earth Kingdom, and when its remaining settlements after the war become the colonial United Republic, there's no bigotry, no suppression of people from the Earth Nation, no smoldering resentment of people from the Fire Nation for invading and occupying them. The boys, who of course hail from the United States, the very colony that the United Republic is based on, depict a vision of colonization in which it takes maybe 2 generations for everyone to just put it all behind them and happily coexist with no baggage from a war that lasted 100 years, a war that is still in living memory. Why do I bring that up? The Avatar world pulls heavily from Asian cultures, especially China, for constructing its own cultures and mythos. Spirits have always been morally complex things in this universe, and that's depicted very well in the origin story of the Avatar. Wan encounters spirits that do kill people and are often aggressive and frightening, but he finds that they are not evil. They have a complex relationship to the world around them just like humans. Shallow absolutes like good and evil are rejected, much like they are in the folklore and religious beliefs of many Asian countries. Just within China, Taoism and Buddhism come to mind. Both of these, speaking very broadly, reject the idea of good and evil as an essential thing that someone can be. An attitude that can be found throughout many of the non-Abrahamic religions and belief systems around the world, including those belonging to Inuit Aboriginal cultures which influence the water tribes that serve as a catalyst for the struggle over the spirit world in Book 2. In the Americas and Australia, as well as parts of Asia and Africa, and hell, even Europe itself, Christianity was used to spearhead colonization. Ethnic and cultural cleansing were often justified with some notion of teaching the savages about civility and God. In a grim reflection of this history, what the boys do is colonize the mythos of the Avatar universe. So let's talk about Rava and Vaatu. At first, they resemble yin and yang, two seemingly contradictory forces of light and darkness, that not only depend on each other to exist, but in a way make up a whole that is greater than either of the two parts. But then things take a turn. The interconnected nature of Rava and Vaatu is quickly neglected in favor of depicting Vaatu as simply evil, and a thing that must be stopped. Wan's victory and Korra's victory in the finale is not restoring the balance of power between Rava and Vaatu. Their victory is defeating Vaatu and locking him away in a special tree. Because despite a nod toward dualism, toward the idea that there is no good and evil, but rather opposing interdependent forces, affecting and giving rise to each other, Rava and Vaatu represent objective good and evil as independent entities. The boys craft a very Christian myth in which the Avatar basically gets caught up in a struggle between God and Satan. This removes any potential of sympathy for Unalaq's perspective. Even though he correctly identifies a problem in this world, he doesn't want to restore balance either. He's only truly interested in obtaining power. Wait, we already did this. Guys, come on. Unalaq's goal is to fuse with Satan, becoming what he calls, and this is not a joke, the Dark Avatar.
And together we will become the new Avatar. A Dark Avatar.
And the Avatar, who we learn is God's human manifestation on Earth, must vanquish the objective evil to restore balance. Now, let's think about that for a minute. You may recall me posing the question in the Book 1 video, what is balance? By the end of Book 1, balance is understood to be stopping Amon and the Equalists, meaning upholding the status quo and the hierarchy of oppression that comes with it is considered balance. By declaring the Avatar the literal embodiment of objective good, balance becomes good. Balance is portrayed as good defeating evil, a notion that flies entirely in the face of the dualistic philosophy that this series used to draw so heavily from. So if balance is good defeating evil, what does that tell us about the balance Korra brings to Republic City in Book 1 by putting down the revolution of an oppressed group in society? It is dangerous to play with ideas of objective good and evil because if you successfully declare someone good, then their actions become justified by the very fact that they are good. Audiences can be led to ignore all manner of questionable actions from a point of view character if they understand them to be good and righteous. If the Avatar is the embodiment of Rava and Rava is good, then, well,
America is great because America is good.
So we find neither Korra nor Unalaq were really pursuing any kind of balance between these two entities. Neither of them were trying to restore the dualistic relationship between Rava and Vaatu. Either the good boy won or the bad boy won. In the end, Korra does decide to desegregate the spirit world and the human world, which is what Unalaq wanted to do, except blue instead of red. But this represents a rekindling of humankind's connection to nature. Nah, I'm just kidding. Stop me if you've heard this one before, but there is no systemic change. Industrialization is not scaled back. People do not become more in touch with the spiritual roots of bending again. And the capitalist status quo is completely unchallenged. The show that I want Korra to be, and the show it often presumes itself to be, is one that looks at major developmental and ideological milestones of somewhat recent history and works as a thought experiment to show how we could have taken a more balanced approach. The benefits of industrialization are too numerous to be ignored, so opposing it entirely and trying to turn back the clock on societal development like Unalaq may be the wrong approach. Perhaps in an alternate world where we have, say, a godlike being on Earth who can influence major world events in the direction of balance, a sort of solar punk-esque reimagining of industrialization could have come about. An increase in those same productive forces, but one that made room for humanity's relationship to nature and each other. A world where communities had some control over this progress, rather than being at the whims of a handful of industrialists. What would that have looked like? Would we have been able to get the same benefits? If not, would the trade-off have been worth it? Would we be staring down climate crisis today if we had taken a path like that, if we had instilled those values at the core of modern society? But Book 2 doesn't ask those questions. It takes the status quo as a given, even when wearing the mask of change by opening the spirit portals. People are still disconnected from the natural world, and yet better than ever at bending, so why would they even want to redevelop that relationship with nature, with the spirits? In the cool action show where bending plays such a central role, why would we, the audience, care either? The allegory of bending as wealth from Book 1 takes on an almost meta form in Book 2. Bending is wealth in that it holds currency with the audience. We want to see action. We want to see cool, magical feats. In a story that glorifies the increased wealth of industrialization while ignoring the consequences of that wealth, benders just keep getting bigger and better. And as we see in the almost universally panned climactic battle, there is such a thing as too much. Perhaps if the distance humans had developed from the natural world since the last airbender had, say, weakened people's bending, had real tangible consequences in the context of the show, we'd better understand why Unalaq thought there was a problem in the first place. Unalaq is most easily read as a radical environmentalist, doing whatever it takes to pull humanity back from the path of development society is taking toward one more in tune with the natural world, though he never gives any real justification for why this would be a good idea, other than vague jabs at how decadent the modern world is.
I've always loved the Glacier Spirits Festival. It's fun.
This festival used to be a solemn time of fasting and meditation.
He's a hit at parties. Between Unalaq's concerns being given so little justification, Varric's crimes being treated so lightly, the Christianization of the Avatar mythology, and the way Republic City as a colony is never meaningfully criticized in any of this, the ideological blueprint that infects every facet of Book 2 is the dominant ideology the boys, like any American, have spent their lives immersed in. The ideology not just of capitalism, but of colonization. Most people on Earth are living in either a colony, a country that was once colonized, or a country that did the colonizing. The colonial era was one that fundamentally shaped the modern world, and it informs our understanding of what words like modern or primitive even mean, of what progress looks like. In a setting so rich with struggle between industry and nature, between indigenous spirituality and Western beliefs, Book 2 was a perfect opportunity to explore how being colonized impacts the land, the people, the culture, and maybe we could have learned a little something about the world we now inhabit. But instead, the boys just let all of that history wash right over them. And what they created instead is a portrait of the colonized mind.
If you are the child of God and God is a part of you, then in your imagination, God's supposed to look like you. And when you accept a picture of the deity assigned to you by another people, you become the spiritual prisoners of that other people.